Hello everyone. In this video, you will see the continuation of the manhwa titled Seduce the Fox, Part 9. Please put a like and subscribe if you like this video. Your participation will help our channel. Thank you. Let's go.
Shiho asked his younger brother, did he really give up his bead himself? Seol-ho replied that he was on the verge of death, so he wanted to help Yhwach before he left. He, like his older brother, wanted to repay her for everything she had done for them. Shiho anxiously asked if the boy realized what they were going to do to him. How could he go to Yahwa's house willingly? Yes, Seol-ho was on the verge of death, but Seol-ho interrupted his brother and said that he felt like if he didn't do it, his brother would have left him alone anyway. When he and Yhwach were separated, Shiho looked like a living corpse. It was as if his life had ended the moment he saw Yhwach for the last time. He was drawn to the girl, and he was completely oblivious to his younger brother, and Seol-ho understood everything, but he was very afraid of being alone. He thought that if Yhwach died, Shiho would follow her, but it seems he was wrong. Seol-ho told his brother that he didn't know it would be so hard without him. He only wanted him and Yhwach to be happy, but his sacrifice only made it worse. Seol-ho asked Shiho to stop hating Yhwach, and admitted that while his bead was inside her, he felt the same way she did. Yhwach really treasured them, and didn't cheat for her own gain. After that, Seol-ho asked the elder to explain all this to Yhwach when she woke up, to tell her that it wasn't her fault in any way. Seol-ho was glad that she had survived, and she had absolutely nothing to apologize for. Shiho cried, asking his brother why he was now worrying about what to say to her. Who took his brother's face in his palms and apologized to him for making him suffer so much. It couldn't have occurred to him that his brother was so terrified of losing him, but he assured him that everything was all right now. I felt no more pain, and asked the older man to remember only the good moments with them. Then he would be able to leave this world peacefully. Shiho anxiously asked the younger one, what was he talking about? Why was he going to leave the world? Where does he want to go? The little fox looked at his older brother with eyes both wise and yet slightly sad at the same time, for it was time to say goodbye. More and more cracks were appearing on the fox bead, and soon Seol-ho would disappear. Shiho begged his brother not to leave him. After all, he didn't even have time to do anything for him. It can't end like this. After all, Yhwach said she could change the past and then Seol-ho could live. The boy said he already changed everything he wanted to change. Now the older one needs to accept it. Pretty soon, Yhwach will remember everything to the end, and she will be very sad. And when she finds out the whole truth, she'll be even more hurt. So Seol-ho wanted Shiho to be by her side and comfort her so she wouldn't suffer. Although he could heal the wounds on his body, but the mental ones were beyond him. That was Shiho's task. At this moment, the scars from the past began to disappear on Yhwach's body. Seol-ho once again asked if his brother would take care of Yhwach, but he only remained silent, letting silent tears flow down his cheeks. The younger man hugged him, and told him that he knew how much it hurt him to remember the past, and apologized for upsetting him. But Shiho should let him go, no matter how unbearable it was. Shiho hugged him back, and Seol-ho began to dissolve into thin air. Lastly, the boy said that his brother had done a lot for him, and now he should live for himself. Looking into his eyes, Seol-ho said happily that his brother was like a father to him. He was happy around him, and now he wants him to find his happiness too. The last word was goodbye, and Seol-ho disappeared forever. When Yhwach woke up and Shiho informed her that the bead was no longer in her, she began to anxiously ask where it had disappeared to, or maybe she had done something to it herself but couldn't remember it. What should she do to get it back? She asked Shiho to tell her what to do because she was already guilty of not being able to change the past, and Seol-ho died because of her. The girl was almost screaming with panic, and Shiho took her by the shoulders and told her that there was something she needed to know and listen to him. After hearing this, she sat there in shock. It turns out she wasn't going back in time to change it, but just to remember everything. And it was Seol who was living inside of her. And he and her father both died because of her as well. She refused to accept that as the truth, and said that there must still be a way to go back in time again and make things right. Shai-Ho told the girl that it wasn't all for nothing. She was doing this for his brother, and even if she didn't manage to change the outcome, what mattered was that she tried her best. He had gotten it all wrong and misled her, and she no longer had to suffer because of his hatred. What's more, she now has much more reason and right to hate him and take revenge on him. He had earned it. Shai-Ho then said that Yi-Ho no longer has to try for their sake, so she can tell him what she wants. If she wants to avenge her father or go back to where he took her from, he will do whatever she says. He looked at Shi-Ho with horror. To him, everything was simple, and she, a few minutes ago in the past, had seen him kill her father and everyone else and then just walk away. He'd wanted to kill her too, but he'd only left her for the memories of her brother. He was pained by the brutal death of Shi-Ho. Now how could he safely suggest it? Give her a choice? He wanted her again. Before the girl could finish her sentence, her whole body trembled and then she fell on her back. Shai-Ho picked her up and started to ask her what was wrong. The girl didn't answer and only grabbed the collar of her dress on her chest with her hands. She was panting, and then the fox realized that Sol-Ho's bead had shattered to the point where the wound on Yi-Hua's chest had healed. Only the outer wounds had had time to heal, but the cut on her heart had not, and now, without the bead, Yi-Hua could not reincarnate. She could die at any moment. The only option left was to share the fox power with her. Shi-Ho pulled the dying Yi-Hua by her thighs and hovered over her. Su-Ah walked through the forest to her property. She wrapped the wound on her thigh with a piece of cloth and held the other wound on her arm with her palm. She still couldn't believe that the head of the white foxes could do such a thing. She promised herself that she wouldn't just leave it like that. And he would definitely dance with her in the future. She would return to his palace, capture and tear the fox apart. She was distracted from her plan of revenge and anger by the servants. Several guards ran up to her mistress and said that there was an urgent message from the palace. And then, noticing that the leader was wounded, they asked her what had happened to her, and if she was all right. The girl replied that there was no need to make such a fuss and asked what the message from the palace said. The guard confusedly replied that His Majesty had gotten worse. After saying that, Su-Ra ran towards the palace to meet her father. Ever since he had read that mysterious letter in the White Fox village many years ago, the man had never recovered from the shock. And then, many years ago, the little girl had to become a new chapter. He lay on his bed, his whole body trembling. The servants asked him to relax, but his body was in spasm. Su-Ra ran to her father's bedside and called out to him. She then asked the subjects, the white foxes, when did he start having seizures, and demanded that they keep a better eye on him. How could they have allowed this to happen? The servants guiltily apologized for what had happened, and said that the seizures had started so suddenly that they couldn't understand anything. At this moment, Mujin grabbed his daughter's hand with a firm grip. Su-Ra turned around and asked her father what he wanted to tell her, but he called her an impostor. This was a shock to Su-Ra, and Mujin continued, and said that she is just a little mouse who thinks she is the ruler, and he doesn't know what trick she used to cloud everyone's mind, but he can't be fooled. She has no right to occupy this place since it belongs to Yan, and demanded that she give everything back to Yano. And then his mood changed as he shook his head in frustration and put his hands on his daughter's shoulders, desperately saying that since she wanted power so badly, she could take everything. But Young-Oh, he wanted her to give it all back to Young-Oh. Mujin managed to calm down. So-Ru was taken out of his chambers, and her wounds were treated and clean bandages were applied. One of the servants said that her father was no longer in critical condition, and asked the girl not to take it personally. Most likely, the Lord simply did not recognize her, and if he remembered, he would never say such words to his daughter. Su-Ra agreed with the servant's words, and clarified that they had served her father for a long time. They nodded, and then she asked if they knew anything about her father's relationship with the former head of the White Foxes. The servant replied with a smile that they were loyal friends. Her father, Mujin, was a troublemaker, and Young-Oh liked to explore everything. He had a very mild temperament. It's amazing that they were able to bond. Her father was in trouble one day. when he decided to go to a human village, and Young Ho decided to go after him to save him because he was injured. The servant, who was previously the teacher of the two young masters, apologized for getting too caught up in reminiscing about the past. Sura told him that, on the contrary, she would like to hear more stories and asked him to tell the story to the end. When night fell, Sura was alone in the room. She pondered over the white fox's story. After telling the story, he said that many people believed that their paths had parted because of the woman who was a human. But the previous ruler Young Oh was definitely not a fox, who would sideline the ruling of the state because of a romantic relationship. And the servant thought that Mr. Mujin knew and understood that. And now it seemed to him that the Lord was regretting his actions. His Majesty must be missing the close friend he killed with his own hands. Probably all his life, Suri's father needs to tell everything on his heart, but since ruler Young Oh is dead, it's impossible. It's unlikely that Mu Jin will open his soul to anyone but his friend. At this time, in the White Fox Palace, Yeha was refusing the transmission of fox energy that involved intimacy. After everything that had happened, she had no desire right now. Shihu carefully said that the girl's heart had not fully healed yet and her life was now in danger. He knows perfectly well that this disgusted her, but he asked her to accept it, at least for the sake of her own survival. Yehawa, trembling her whole body, with tears in her eyes, asked, "What does she have to live for?" Those words startled Shiho. Yehawa said that she couldn't protect or save anyone. She couldn't fix anything in the past, and she couldn't see her own future. What was the point of staying alive then? Closing her eyes and letting the tears flow down her cheeks, she said that if she who wanted to do this out of guilt, then she didn't have to. She was very tired and asked to be allowed to die. Shiho desperately begged Yeha not to say such words, and said that it would be better for her to be angry with him than to wait so doomedly for her end. He asked her not to talk like she didn't care about anything anymore. And then he thought he had no right to say those words. He had misunderstood everything, and pushed her away, and Yi Hui had cared for his little brother since the first day they met, got her to the point where she had to go back in time, and now he wants to force her to live with it all going forward. He had no right to demand that she... At this moment, realizing that the fox had hesitated and stopped talking, Yeha opened her eyes and looked at him. His face displayed sorrow and regret. Then the girl tensely said that he was the one who thought she was disgusted while he obviously wasn't eager. Which one of them is disgusted? And she asked him to look at his reflection. After all, you can see that he is only forcing himself to do it, so what is there to suffer so much for? Shiho excitedly said that it's not like that at all, and he's sorry that he caused her so much pain. She was supposed to live a completely different life, next to people who had always cared for her, living in health with a man who'd appreciate and protect her. And he ruined all that, and deserves only her hatred, and knows she won't find comfort even if he repents his mistakes. And if she hates him and rips his heart to shreds, he will gladly accept. Therefore, he asked her to accept his energy once more. These words, in Shiho's desperation, surprised Alma greatly. She lay there with her eyes wide open. Shihu leaned over her and, hugging her shoulders, said into her neck that he wouldn't force her any more, but he didn't want to see her die before his eyes. Memories of how Shiho had once said that he could endure anything in Young. Yeha could take out her anger on him because then he would know that her health would improve, immediately flashed through his mind. Then he said that since she was getting more energy in her, he would gladly take any punishment and beatings from her. He had always been like this, and he hadn't changed in his heart. Tears came to Yewa's eyes again. In her thoughts, she said that Shiho was just awful, and didn't understand why next to him she always became so weak. Why did she constantly feel a sense of regret? Out loud, she asked, why was he saying that? Did he really feel sorry for her? And that's why he wants to save her life. Shihu lifted himself up, looked into her eyes, and said, begging her, taking the girl's face in his palms. The fox confessed that the reason he stole her was because he just wanted her by his side. Revenge was just an excuse. Shiho wished that Yi Heiwei was near him. But now he had no right to do so. So he wanted her to stay alive, or his last wish. With tears, he asked Ye Hua to live, not for him, but for herself. His tears dripped down the girl's cheeks. He said he didn't want her life to end on such a horrible note. Yahweh also cried, and touching Shaiho's face with the palm of her hand, pulled her to him and kissed her. Shiho lifted her up, put his arms around her waist, and deepened the kiss. In her mind, Yahweh said she couldn't forget all the things Shaiho had done, and one day that feeling of shame and hatred will catch up with them and destroy them. She will want to understand him, but it will cause sadness as they will be reminded of the past again. She will gradually be consumed by these negative emotions, and she will go crazy. And if Shiho wants to hold her, he should hold her tight. Let his pleading and despair be a comfort to her, and overshadow the chaos in her heart. She mentally asked Shiho to hold her as tightly as possible and not let go. Shiho took off Yahweh's clothes and leaned between her legs. She didn't know where to put herself from the excess of feeling she was feeling right now. Clutching the sheet in her hands, she asked Shiho what he was doing this for, because this way he wouldn't be able to transfer the fox energy to her. Shiho replied that if she didn't relax, it would be difficult for him to enter, and he didn't want to hurt her. The girl said that doing so would only make her chest ache more and asked him to hurry up. After taking off his clothes, Shiho said that in that case he would take it slow, so she wouldn't be in too much pain, and if she felt discomfort and pain, she could bite him. The process was long and hard, but Shiho tried to transfer the energy painlessly. He moved slowly, and it made Yahweh tense up. He asked if she was in pain. The girl replied that the slow movements were making her concentrate too much on him inside and asked him to move faster, so she wouldn't think about anything. After this request, Shiho didn't hold himself back anymore. He changed poses and tempos, and at one point began desperately whispering Yahweh's name right above her ear. The girl froze, wondering if in their previous nights he had ever said her name like that, as if in a pleading tone. She liked to think and feel that Shiho needed her. Those words comforted her more than anything. They locked their hands together, pausing for breaths and continuing again. In the end, both of them were incredibly tired. Sweat dripped off Yahweh in a downpour. She lay in Shiho's arms and breathed heavily. One last movement, and that was the end of it. Shiho got out of bed and apologized for such a long process. Apparently, he was too overexcited and said he was about to bring a towel to wipe her off. But Yahweh stopped him. Placing her foot on Shiho's thigh with a blush on her cheeks, she said that she still didn't feel well. She didn't seem to be fully healed yet. Shiho looked at her with a surprised look. Shiho wanted to wipe Yahweh of the blood he himself was in, and in his embrace he soiled her. But what he didn't expect was that she would ask for the night to continue, thus hinting that she was supposedly still sick and needed more fox energy. Her pitiful voice that could bring her to tears, or irritation, a body like white porcelain that could crack at the slightest touch and blush, so red that it was hard to distinguish whether it was blood or body heat. All these things made Shiho's head spin, but he stopped his desires and tried to control his mind so as not to act too possessive and selfish towards the girl. Touching her hair, tongue and lips, wanting to bite her. All these actions were done in a row to heal Yahweh. That's what Shiho told himself, and he forbade letting his instincts take over. And he didn't want Yahweh to let him worry, demanding that he not allow himself to worry too much. And so he ignored her request and carried her to the bathing area. They sat in the water with their arms around each other, but Yahweh was sad. She thought she had hinted clearly enough that she wanted to continue, but Shiho looked at her too seriously and just carried her into the bathtub, wiped the blood off her body, and then placed her in the bathing room without saying a word or touching her once more. Was he really only doing this to transfer his power to her? But in reality she was disgusting to him, and he was looking at her with pity. Then he still had to continue. After all she said, she still felt bad. She felt ashamed that her desire hadn't faded, unlike the fox, and looked like she was going along with her desires. So she covered her face, blushing heavily. Yahweh didn't notice how these thoughts made her hunched over. Shiho touched her chest with his large palms and said that if she bent like that, the pain inside would increase, and helped her straighten her back, leaving her hands on her chest. Yahweh was confused and asked what was he doing. Shiho remained silent and only leaned down to her neck and began to massage it. Yahweh demanded that he not touch her here, and then Shiho lowered his hands into the water, going lower to her stomach, and asking if he could touch here. Yahweh turned around to face him, and they merged again without leaving the bathing area. Shihao couldn't take his eyes off Yahweh. So small and fragile, skin that easily turned red when touched, but yet it couldn't be broken so easily. Yahweh was tired, and with a flushed face, hugged Shaihu tightly around his shoulders. He touched her face and felt the heat. After getting up from the water, he didn't know where to lie down to continue as Yahweh was really getting worse. So he decided to lie right on the floor near the bathing area and put the girl on top of him. Yahweh was scared as she wasn't used to this position, but Shihu didn't let her say a word. Soon the girl gave herself over to the process and began to take the initiative herself, resting her hands firmly on Shihu's shoulders. The young fox felt that he was finding it increasingly difficult to restrain himself as he saw how much Yahweh was enjoying himself. Apparently realizing that she had been around Shihu all this time and not the matured Seoho, the process had become much more pleasurable for her. She wasn't in pain, and she wanted more. Breathing out, Yahweh said that she had had enough and they could stop. They were really tired, but Shihu squinted his eyes and kept going, reminding with a sly smile that the girl herself had asked for more. After all, if she wanted to get rid of her worries in the future, she had to make sure that the fox energy was transferred in the right amount. Without letting Yehina say a word, Shaihu kissed her firmly and soon stopped. Looking into her eyes, he touched his thumb to her lips, but the girl angrily bit it. Shaihu smilingly pressed her head against his chest and they fell asleep. Meanwhile, Li Jiang, who was in his house with a bandaged head wound, angrily pounded his fist on the table, resenting the fact that the head of the dark foxes had tricked him. He had managed to retreat and return to the shelter, and was already preparing a new. One of the servants worriedly told him that if he moved and fidgeted so much, his wound would open up, bleeding more, and it would only get worse. He needed to calm down, but Li Jiang shouted that he would get rid of all the foxes. First of all, the white fox, who dared to kidnap Yahao, and then that traitorous Suru. She would see what his anger could do. He will definitely bring Yahweh back and destroy all the descendants of the fox tribe. Shihu put Yahweh to bed, dressing her in a handbook, and while she slept stroking her hand, he was anxious. After bathing that night, after resting for a while, Shihu carried Yahweh to bed and gave her the fox energy again. The girl was already so tired that she immediately fell asleep after the last time. Shihu was about to cover her with a blanket when she cuddled up to him, already asleep, and laid her head on his chest. As he wrapped himself in the blanket and stroked her hair, the fox thought, could you have known how hard his heart was beating when she was cuddling and searching for him like that? Right now, he felt that she was completely his and it was mutual. This night, despite the separation from his younger brother and the bitter truth of the past, he was happy. Kissing the girl on the top of her head, he mentally said that he kept forgetting how much pain he had brought her in the past, and that he would never be forgiven for it. Afterwards, when Shaihu got up and left the room, one of the servants approached him and said that they had a letter from the head of the Dark Foxes. His Highness urgently needed to look at it. Shihu asked why Su-Ra sent the letter to them. The servant replied that she asked for negotiations. Shaihu didn't understand how Su-Ra could ask for negotiations after she invaded his territory and kidnapped Yahweh, but he still read the letter. Yahweh woke up in the morning. Finding that she was dressed, she didn't find Shaihu nearby and decided to go in search of him. But as she sat up abruptly, she felt a tugging pain in her lower abdomen. Shihu hadn't let her rest last night and had pounced until she fell asleep. The thought of it was embarrassing, and she immediately blushed. Ignoring her inner feelings, she stood up and left the room. This corridor was unfamiliar to her. She had never been to this part of the palace, and she didn't know where she was going. Should she have waited for Shihu and gone to take a shower? She got lost, but suddenly she heard Shaihu's voice coming from one of the rooms. He was in a meeting with his advisors. One of them said that what the messenger told them was unbelievable, and they shouldn't have believed the head of the Dark Foxes since she was known to be very cunning. Only a while ago, her tribe cooperated with the humans to reclaim the border, and this letter is an obvious ploy to surround Shihu during the fake negotiations and kill. Another counselor said that the request in the letter was made extremely politely, and Su-Ra explained the whole situation, promised that she would take full responsibility for the past war, and apologized for everything. If their attitude continues to be like this, it would be good to meet with them and listen to their side. And if Shaihu was wary of being in the Black Foxes' territory, they could choose another neutral third territory to negotiate. Another advisor said that everything was right, and there was no point in judging the Black Foxes for teaming up with humans, since there were rumors that humans held a grudge against the Black Foxes and were going to organize a war against them. Earlier, Su-Ra and her tribe had invaded the White Fox's borders and destroyed the protective barrier, and it would take a long time for the mages to rebuild it. If a war breaks out during this time and they fail to build a new defense, their tribe will suffer a major crisis. Therefore, the best idea for them would be to make at least a temporary truce with the Black Fox. And in case it breaks, they will at least buy time to recover their strength. Another of the counselors asked if the reason the Black Foxes didn't invade their territory was because they, the White Foxes, had originally invaded their lands first. He was answered that the Dark Foxes had not just invaded their territory, they also targeted His Majesty's woman, and even allowed a man named Li Zong to enter the castle with them. At this moment, Shaihu, who had been listening intently to the arguments, asked everyone to be quiet for a moment as he sensed Yahawa's energy standing outside the door. When he came out, he saw Yahawa's worried face. She anxiously asked if Li Zong was still alive. Shaihu sent her to her chambers and didn't return to talk to her until the evening. She was sitting on the edge of the bed. Shiha sat in front of her on his knees, gazing into the girl's face from bottom to top. Yahawa asked Shihu why Li Zong hadn't come to see her since he was still alive. She thought he died the day she was kidnapped. After all, Shihu had inflicted such wounds on him. Is it possible to survive after such wounds? Shihu said he thought she might regret it if she knew he was alive. After all, now knowing the past, he was indirectly responsible for Eseoho's death. It was Li Zong who had told people that he and his younger brother were responsible for attacking people in the village, even though he knew very well that they weren't involved. And after receiving such help from Eseoho, saving his life was still against. But Shihu realized that Li Zong was the person Yahawa loved, so he didn't say anything. The last good thing he could do to him for taking care of Yahawa for so many years was to let him live. Therefore, he inflicted wounds from which it was possible to survive. But right now, Shihu didn't want to give Yahawa to Li Zong, especially now that he knew that Yahawa had really lost her memory, and Li Zong still hid the truth about the past from her, and continued to be by her side. Hearing that, Yahawa said that she now understood why he hadn't told her about it for all those months. Yahawa asked that when she heard today's news, she didn't understand, was he really going to continue to keep quiet about it? Why didn't he think about her own feelings? Pulling her head up and sighing, Yahawa demanded with a serious tone that Shihu return her to the human world. The fox looked at her with frightened eyes. Shihu was scared because he was afraid of losing Yahawa, and now she was demanding her back to the human world, so she wanted to leave him. Like a little child, he anxiously asked, does she still like Li Zong after everything he did? And does she really want to meet him? Yahawa seriously replied that that's exactly why she wants to talk to him, and after she accomplished all the things in the human world, she would definitely come back to him. Shihu was even more surprised, and asked, what do you mean? She would come back to him. Yahawa explained that she wanted to negotiate with Li Zong to end things with them. She didn't love him and had no feelings for him at all, knowing now how he had treated Eseoho. Moreover, Yahawa now thought it was really reckless that Li Zong was actually gathering an army and was going to go to war against the foxes just to rescue her. The girl pondered seriously and carefully, arching her eyebrows on the bridge of her nose and touching her chin with her hands. She thought that if her plan succeeded, the humans would no longer be a threat to the fox tribe. Therefore, she would go to negotiate to make it clear that it was over between her and Lai Jun. But Shihu continued to look at Yahawa with an expression like an innocent child, and didn't understand how is it that she would go back to him. Yahawa took his face in her palms and said that despite the pain he brought her, she loved him. It took a lot of effort for her to analyze everything and realize that her love was much stronger than the hurt. Despite everything that has happened, her feelings for him are as strong as they were 10 years ago. She has forgiven the hurt because there is so much more love in her heart and she still wants to stay with him and give him that love from her heart, and she wants to make up for the 10 years spent between them in hatred. Xiaohou is so overjoyed by these words that he loudly shouted Yihore's name and put his arms around her waist and pressed his face against her. The girl blushed and tapped him on the head, reminding him that she hadn't forgiven him herself yet. Xiaohou looked at her and told her that he loved her very much and had come a long way to tell her that. Afterward, he hugged her and kissed her, lying down next to her on the bed. A couple days later, the negotiations between the Dark and White Foxes materialized. Sura voiced all the terms of the peace treaty and promised that their tribe would bear all the responsibility for the past war and skirmishes, and if the White Foxes had any more conditions, they were willing to fulfill them as well. Xiaohou told Sura that he was still distrustful of her plan, and directly asked what plan she was hiding behind this peace treaty. Sura admitted that there was something. Then they both asked the servants to leave the room so they could talk in private. Sura asked if Xiaohou remembered the promise he made to her 10 years ago. Xiaohou remembered very well how she demanded him to come to the forest in 10 days, and then she would take him with her, even if it required her to chop off his arms and legs to do so. Back home he learned from Xiao, who that they often met while he went hunting in the guise of an older brother, and she knew that they didn't leave people because of a close friend. Xiaohou asked Suru if she intended to take him back to her place like she wanted 10 years ago. Suru lowered her head and memories flashed before her eyes. Back then, when the deadline she had given her had passed, she was not in the forest. She could barely hold back her tears and thought that he had chosen to live among humans and betrayed her even though he had promised her that he would follow her, and she couldn't forgive him for not even showing up to refuse. But afterward, the servants informed her that there had been a mass murder of a wealthy family in a nearby human village, of which only one girl had survived, and the murderer was their servant. It was confirmed that he was a fox. The fox himself had gone into hiding, because his identity was known to these people, and that was the reason he had killed them. And the survivor was in a shocked state. The servant clarified to the new mistress, should they inquire further into this matter. Sura immediately realized that it was Xiaohou and asked how old was that girl. The servant replied that she was around 10 years old. Sura then thought that it was unlikely that she could be the very friend that Xiaohou had so desperately told her about, who was actually Solhou when they met. She told the servant that there was no need to investigate, but thought that if it really was Xiaohou, no wonder he didn't come that night. He was trying to escape the chase and wanted to keep his identity a secret. She was relieved that he had not completely betrayed her, although he could have sought refuge with her, but he still did not go to her. Moreover, he had sacrificed his friend to save himself, even though he could have sacrificed himself for her before. Su Rui didn't think about it anymore until the next noon. Then she was already older. The servants informed her that a white fox had appeared, claiming to be the heir of the former head of the White Foxes, and was gathering his own kingdom. Many white fox villages began to scatter and move to that fox's new domain. Should they be wary and take some action? Then a full realization came to Suru. Xiaohou didn't go after her, because he knew very well who she was the daughter of. He knew that they were enemies, and that was why he was so diligent in hiding his identity. He had been saving up his power and strength, and now he had finally made himself known. But she decided to do nothing and only watch his further actions. Many white foxes had left him. All this time, she thought he was an impostor and couldn't be Ano's son, but when she found out that he had kidnapped a human woman, there was no more doubt. He had completely followed in the footsteps of his father, who had also been fascinated by a human woman at one time. That was when Suri wanted to kidnap Yahao to talk to her and find out how she was able to fall in love with Xiao. But when she did, she realized that he didn't love her, and the reason was the fox bead that was inside the... And that was why Sura wanted to talk to Xiaohou. Her conscience came back to her, and she felt guilty for what had happened. She really wanted to say that she wanted to unite and take him back to her as she had planned 10 years ago, but suddenly one of her servants burst into the room. He said there was urgent news and whispered something in her mistress's ear. She was frightened. Something had happened to her father again. She got up from the table and at first wanted to apologize to Xiaohou that they would have to postpone the negotiations, but she changed her mind and asked him to come with her to her castle. Shiho only interjected. What should he do there?